What truly happens when loyalty collides with destiny on a tower high above the sleeping castle? The air bites with cold, torches flicker against stone, and somewhere in the dark, two minds sharpen like blades. You probably won't survive this, but you'll understand it. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I'm really curious, from which part of the world are you watching this video? Write your country in the comments. Let's see how far this little story has traveled. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You stand at the threshold of the kitchens long after curfew, guided only by rumor and the faint glow of floating candles, and the silence down here feels thicker than the castle walls themselves, as if Hogwarts is politely pretending you're not trespassing. You notice how the air hums with a strange tension, the kind that suggests someone recently argued with a cauldron and lost. 3 soft jokes slip in without warning, a reminder that even rebellions can smell faintly of burnt pudding. And as you descend the last few steps, you swear you hear something like the synchronized snapping of fingers, an impossible idea considering House-Elves traditionally avoid anything resembling coordination unless a feast is involved. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your mind about medieval servants using coded gestures during nighttime routines, and for a moment, you wonder if history really repeats itself, or if it's just trying to get your attention with a dramatic cape flourish. A quirky fringe tidbit about Victorian-era butlers who allegedly communicated by whistling through different teapots briefly distracts you, proving your brain has the comedic timing of a chipped goblet. Yet beneath all this soft humor, you can sense a deeper scholarly debate phrase taking shape. Some experts insist that subservient magical beings never challenged the boundaries set for them, while others whisper that resistance often began in the quietest, most unseen corners. Here at the bottom of this staircase you feel the truth waiting, warm as a hearth and sharp as a quill. You ease deeper into the kitchens, where warmth rolls over you like a quilt just pulled from a hearth, and the first thing you notice is how the usual cheer of clattering cookware feels oddly choreographed tonight, as if every ladle, pot, and pumpkin pasty tray is part of a quiet symphony rehearsing for an audience you can't see. The House-Elves move quickly, but there's a strange rhythm to their motions. A spoon taps 3 times, a kettle is spun twice, a stack of plates shifts left instead of right, and it dawns on you that this might not be kitchen chaos, but coded communication politely pretending to be innocent hustle. A soft joke pops into your head about how even your own attempts at Morse code once resulted in summoning your neighbor's cat instead of delivering a message, and another follows as you imagine how the elves would rate your culinary coordination, probably with the same sympathy one gives scorched toast. A third joke rises as you realize that if these elves are forming a secret network, you're about as stealthy as a cauldron rolling downhill. A mainstream historical fact drifts in about how medieval guilds secretly exchanged information through the placement of tools on workbenches, providing a real-world echo that makes the scene before you feel almost academic. While a quirky fringe tidbit about a 19th century chef who believed his saucepans whispered gossip adds just enough odd flavor to keep the atmosphere whimsically suspicious. As you watch a trio of elves subtly nudge sugar bowls in geometric patterns, you hear the whispered scholarly debate phrase murmuring in the back of your mind. Whether magical beings develop hidden systems of autonomy or simply reflect the intentions projected onto them by wizards who seldom look below eye level. The question lingers in the air, shining faintly like steam rising from the ovens, and you feel yourself drifting further into the mystery, guided by codes written not in ink but in the quiet choreography of enchanted kitchens. You move cautiously along the warm flagstones, feeling the faint vibration of tiny feet marching with purpose just beyond the edge of the firelight, and soon the shadows resolve into a sight so unexpected it slows your breath. A gathering of house-elves in a secluded corner of the kitchens, forming tidy ranks beside overturned cauldrons, broomsticks held like spears, laundry baskets propped as shields, and one stout elf proudly wearing a napkin tied like a battle standard. All of it arranged with the solemnity of a miniature army drill that would be adorable if it weren't also slightly intimidating. You watch them practice maneuvers in crisp silence, the silence broken only by the occasional squeaky sneeze, and realize that whatever you thought elves were capable of, this coordinated display exceeds it by several levels, and one very impressive spin move. A light joke surfaces as you imagine trying to organize your own friends into marching formations. Most would be out of breath before the first pivot. And another follows as you picture a defense against the dark arts professor assigning battle laundry coordination as weekend homework, while a third joke flutters in when an elf's oversized helmet, actually a polished soup tureen, slides down over their eyes, and they soldier on anyway with the determination of someone who has already faced worse, like cleaning up after a Hufflepuff baking experiment. Yet even as you take in the comic details, a mainstream historical fact slips gently into your thoughts about how medieval servants were trained for emergency defense during sieges, revealing that this unexpected elven display mirrors real-world household hierarchies under threat. And before you can fully digest that, a quirky fringe tidbit asserts itself about an 18th century French manor where kitchen staff allegedly fought off intruders using only ladles and an aggressively flambéed dessert, giving this scene an odd but comforting precedent. The scholarly debate phrase whispers like an echo from some distant lecture hall. Experts still argue whether magical subordinates evolve strategic thinking independently or if it emerges from centuries of observing the flaws and patterns of their human overseers. And your understanding shifts, recognizing that this assembly may not be mere play, but a rehearsed ritual honed across generations. The elves maintain their disciplined formations, and you notice how they communicate through subtle gestures, a twitch of an ear, a tilt of a ladle, a quiet tap on a pot handle sending signals rippling through the ranks like miniature shockwaves. This is no chaotic rebellion, but something measured and intentional, the way a tide knows exactly how far to reach before slipping back. One elf raises a tiny rolling pin, clearly a command baton, and you watch as their companions react instantly, launching into a drill where they leap into laundry baskets like foxes into burrows, popping up with spatulas raised, then scurrying out in perfect timing. You try not to laugh, but the sheer earnestness of the performance threatens to break your composure, and beneath the humor you sense the deep meaning of their training, protection, autonomy, and quiet unity. You think back to the way elves have always moved unseen, how students barely notice them unless tripping over a bucket they left intentionally in the middle of the hallway. And it dawns on you that blending invisibility with precision is their greatest advantage, one you're only now beginning to appreciate. Another layer of planning reveals itself when a group drags a stack of folded tablecloths into a circle and arranges them like barricades, each fold corner aligned with mathematical precision, suggesting someone here is not only organizing the rebellion, but also doing so with the flair of a textile engineer. The firelight gleams off their eyes, bright with purpose, and you feel a curious mixture of awe and affection, realizing that everything you're witnessing is happening in the castle's blind spot, right below the noses of wizards who assume the kitchens exist solely for midnight snack retrieval. A kettle whistles sharply from a nearby counter, 3 rising notes, and instantly the elves freeze, listening, ears tilted toward the sound as if decoding a message within the steam. You hold still too, sensing the weight of the moment, and when the elves resume, their movements become even more deliberate, suggesting the whistle carried instructions from a kitchen outpost deeper underground. You glimpse how far-reaching this network might be and wonder how long it has existed, quietly strengthening beneath layers of enchantments and daily chores. The gathering continues with a new exercise, this one stranger and more inventive. Elves line up at a long wooden table, each armed with a teacup, and begin practicing synchronized spell work, flicking their fingers toward the cups to levitate them into tiny hovering battalions before gently lowering them back with a grace you could only dream of achieving during your charms exams. The third cup on the left wobbles wildly, causing its elf to look panicked. but the others crowd in around him with supportive squeaks and encouraging shoulder pats, making the moment both endearing and a testament to their collective unity. As you watch this display, another joke nudges your thoughts. Your own attempt at levitating a teacup would probably break international magical law, and a ripple of warmth spreads through you. The elves' teamwork feels like something deeper than rebellion, something rooted in centuries of quiet companionship, yet now blooming into something electric and brave. Their movement shifts yet again, this time into a scouting maneuver where pairs of elves dart between ovens, under tables, and around cupboards with startling efficiency, reconnoitering every corner of the kitchen as if preparing to defend it or perhaps reclaim it. Their speed is astonishing, blurring from one shadow to another, and you realize that if elves ever decided to fully weaponize their natural stealth, Hogwarts wouldn't stand a chance. Not even the staircases would know who tripped whom. You sense the unspoken emotion woven through their drill. Not anger, not revenge, but a yearning for recognition, autonomy, and a future where their magic belongs to them as much as their service belongs to the castle. The more you witness, the clearer it becomes that this isn't rebellion for rebellion's sake. It's a careful, measured response to centuries of invisibility, a whispered declaration that even the smallest beings can decide the direction of their own destiny. Another historical parallel floats across your thoughts, quieter this time. Stories of medieval household retainers forming underground alliances to defend their families during political unrest, illustrating how people who performed the least glamorous tasks often carried the heaviest burdens and the deepest loyalties. The elves before you reflect that same dual nature, devoted but not docile, gentle but not passive, quiet but never truly silent. A final quirky tidbit trickles into your awareness about a rumored estate in Wales, where brownies once staged a peaceful occupation of the pantry until their wages, mostly cream, were renegotiated. You can't help but smile at the overlap between myth and what you're witnessing now, and as you take in the full scene, the ranks, the signals, the silent coordination, you feel that whispered scholarly debate phrase returning, unresolved but resonant, questioning whether magical servitude was ever natural or merely normalized. The elves conclude their practice with a resounding stomp of tiny feet, a rhythmic pulse echoing through the kitchen walls like a heartbeat, announcing the beginning of something long overdue. And you know this is only the first glimpse of a rebellion crafted with the quiet precision of beings who have always known exactly how to move unseen. You step away from the fading echo of tiny synchronized footsteps and move toward a narrow service corridor that seems to breathe with its own sleepy warmth. The stones here older, darker, and worn into a subtle dip as though countless quiet feet have traced the same hidden path for centuries. And the deeper you go, the more you sense an ancient pulse beneath the castle, a memory older than feasts and dormitories, older even than the sorting hat's first off-key hum. Eventually, the passage opens into a vast chamber beneath the Great Hall, a place no student speaks of and few professors remember exists, carved in geometric patterns that shimmer faintly with residual enchantments. And at its center lies a stone tablet, half buried under fallen dust cloths and abandoned crates, its surface etched with lines that twist together like vines of forgotten history. The tablet radiates a soft blue glow, enough to illuminate the carvings depicting House-Elves standing beside the four founders. Not behind them, not beneath them, but beside them, each holding an object of symbolic significance. A torch for Gryffindor, a scroll for Ravenclaw, a loaf of bread for Hufflepuff, and a small dagger for Slytherin. The imagery unmistakable in its message that these beings were once partners, not property, shaping the castle's early days with magic woven into hearthfires, wards, and the very bricks under your feet. A light joke bubbles up about how history textbooks somehow managed to skip the chapter where House-Elves negotiated dagger privileges, followed by another soft joke, imagining an early Hogwarts staff meeting where an elf politely outranked a wizard during discussions about hallway drafts, and a third joke drifts in as you picture the founders telling students to clean their rooms only for the elves to roll their eyes in ancient exasperation. Yet beneath the humor, rests a mainstream historical fact about feudal households, where non-human helpers in folklore were often bound by agreements rather than servitude, suggesting this tablet may record a magical parallel long overlooked, and a quirky fringe tidbit surfaces recalling a scholar who once theorized that early British castles employed mythical beings as protectors before human staff existed. As your fingers brush the cold stone, the engraved runes flutter with faint light, reacting to your presence like a whisper returning after centuries, and the truth becomes clearer. The elves' service wasn't imposed, but initially offered in exchange for shared magical authority, a balance that may have eroded over time as generations of wizards grew comfortable with invisible assistance and elves shrank into the shadows to maintain traditions others no longer valued. The scholarly debate phrase hums at the edge of your thoughts. Some historians argue the pact was symbolic, while others claim it was magically binding, a contract of souls and spells that defined mutual roles in the early Hogwarts ecosystem. But the more you study the carvings, the more you suspect that the second camp had the right idea, because the stone's enchantments feel deliberate, like a vow set in runic stone designed to ensure that elves would never be subservient, only collaborative. Another detail catches your eye, lines branching from each founder's symbol toward depictions of elves performing tasks not as chores, but as ritual duties, stabilizing the castle's structural magic, tending roots of enchanted foundations, and maintaining the harmony between ambient energy and protective wards, a system far more complex than the simplistic notion of kitchen helpers, passed down through school folklore. Dust hangs in the air like drifting parchment ash as you circle the tablet, noticing a lower inscription partially obscured by the rubble of fallen shelves. When you brush it clean, the words describe a second binding, a reforging of roles necessitated by an unspecified calamity, and the scene carved beside it shows wizards standing above elves rather than beside them, the magic flowing downward instead of shared, the balance altered in a way that makes your chest tighten with the weight of centuries-long consequences. A small light joke flickers through your mind involving how even magical societies can't resist turning committee decisions into generational problems, but the gravity of the tableau overshadows it. The elves here look smaller, dimmer, their carvings lacking the confident posture found in the earlier part of the tablet, and the wizards appear grander, their stances rigid, their hands extended in a gesture that reads less like partnership and more like command. Another mainstream historical fact trickles in about how medieval contracts often shifted over generations, as written agreements faded into myth, and roles were remembered incorrectly or conveniently reinterpreted, a pattern strikingly similar to what you're seeing before you. A quirky fringe tidbit joins it, recalling a historian who once claimed that magical families sometimes used enchanted heirlooms to rewrite memory itself, though no one ever proved it, and for a moment you wonder whether something similar happened here, whether the past was reshaped until elves became what later wizards expected them to be. Your gaze drifts toward a cracked section of the tablet, depicting what looks like a ceremonial circle, elves arrayed around powerful symbols carved into the ground, and you realize with a sudden jolt that the imagery resembles the floor pattern beneath your feet. This chamber isn't just a storage room but a ritual site, perhaps once used to maintain the balance of the castle's early enchantments, a place where elves and wizards combined their magic to stabilize Hogwarts itself. The realization shivers through you like cold air slipping under a door. It means the foundation of the rebellion upstairs isn't simply frustration or desire for freedom, but a reclamation of a role erased from collective memory. A soft joke tries to surface about the founders never labeling this room properly, but your mind is too occupied tracing the delicate maze of carved lines, connecting the ancient symbols to the present tense rhythm of the castle. You realize the elves likely know about this place, perhaps they've always known, and the drills they performed earlier might not be military, but ritual, preparing for a reawakening of the pact long buried beneath enchanted ceilings and hundreds of feasts. You kneel beside the broken lower half of the tablet, brushing away more dust until additional carvings emerge, faint but decipherable. Scenes of elves forging magical threads between hallways, gently stabilizing quirks in the moving staircases, reinforcing defensive wards during storms, and guiding the flow of energy through the walls like caretakers of a living organism, roles that seem less servile and more like guardianship. A magical ecosystem no student handbook ever mentioned. It dawns on you that the elves' duties downstairs, cleaning, cooking, maintaining order, might be masks hiding tasks far more vital to the school's survival. The stone's faded glyphs describe a cycle wherein elves strengthen the magical infrastructure every solstice, their efforts recorded in glowing runes that once pulsed beneath the Great Hall's floor. And this raises the startling possibility that Hogwarts' famous resilience, its ability to heal itself after battles or storms, stems not only from ancient spells, but from the tireless, unseen work of beings the modern magical world overlooks. A soft joke pops into your head about how the staircases might be far more chaotic if elves ever took a vacation, followed by another about how wizards brag about architectural enchantments without realizing someone else handles all the magical maintenance, and a third joke about how even magical towers probably have a "please don't collapse today" checklist that elves manage with dignified annoyance. The chamber's air shifts subtly, carrying a faint scent of old parchment and damp stone as you rise to explore the surrounding walls, each carved with additional imagery reinforcing what the tablet suggests. Hogwarts was never meant to run without elves acting as magical stewards, their role woven into the castle as intimately as the moving portraits or enchanted ceilings. The scholarly debate phrase circles your thoughts again. Some argue that magical servitude evolved naturally, while others insist it resulted from lost agreements. And here, in front of you, the evidence leans strongly toward the latter. The elves' carefully organized drills, their coded signals, their sudden push toward structured resistance, all of it resonates with this rediscovery, as though the ancient pact has begun whispering back into the present, urging them to reclaim a role stolen not by malice, but by centuries of forgetting. You imagine the founders building this chamber with quiet confidence, trusting future generations to honor the agreement, never anticipating how much could fade when tradition transforms into routine. A soft glow begins to pulse from the deepest cracks of the tablet, tiny motes of magic rising like sparks from a forgotten bonfire, and the runes gradually form a lattice of shifting blue light, casting rotating shadows across the stone floor. The air vibrates with a low hum that resembles both a heartbeat and distant thunder, and as you watch, the light gathers toward a single central glyph shaped like a woven knot, its meaning impossible to miss. Unity, partnership, shared magic. This is the heart of the original pact, a vow encoded so deeply it outlived memories, persisting even when its purpose was lost. The glow strengthens until it casts intertwined patterns on your hands, and you understand that the rebellion isn't simply uprising, it's restoration. The elves upstairs aren't just preparing to challenge authority, they are preparing to reassert equilibrium, stepping back into the place in Hogwarts' ecosystem that the world forgot to acknowledge. You step back, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what you've uncovered, and the chamber settles into a soft stillness as though waiting for the next chapter of its story. The ancient contract beneath the Great Hall remains half buried, half awake, and fully aware that change is unfolding above it, its runes flickering like tired eyes opening after a long sleep. The elves' ranks, their training, their signals, every part of their movement now feels aligned with the legacy encoded here, a legacy not of servitude, but of stewardship. You sense that the castle itself knows what's coming, its stones bracing for the shift in energies that will follow if the elves successfully reclaim their role. The gentle hum of magic fills the air, settling into your chest like a promise carved in ancient stone and soft blue light. You leave the hidden chamber with its glowing runes still pulsing faintly behind you, and as the passageway narrows again into familiar warmth, you return to the upper kitchens where the air thickens with magic that feels slightly off, as though the atmosphere itself has begun to vibrate with tiny sparks of disobedience, the kind that makes candles flicker sideways and spoons twitch in their drawers even when no elf is touching them. And before you can take 3 steps, a sugar bowl hops twice on the counter and sneezes glitter into the air, shimmering evidence that something in the elves' enchantments is shifting, slipping, refusing to obey the smooth boundaries that once defined their work. A gentle joke pops into your head about how even your own magic once misfired badly enough to turn your quill into a confused hedgehog for 3 hours. And another soft joke follows as you watch a spice jar try to aggressively organize itself alphabetically only to give up halfway through, while a third joke emerges when a teapot wobbles toward you with the swagger of someone who believes they've earned time off for good behavior. The humor mixes with a rising tension because behind every whimsical misfire you catch the unmistakable pulse of change, a quiet revolution humming through the utensils, fabrics, and enchanted tools that have long mirrored the elves' disciplined magic. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind about how spontaneous magical fluctuations sometimes appeared during periods of social upheaval in medieval wizarding communities, often signaling deeper energetic shifts, and a quirky fringe tidbit surfaces about a Welsh sorcerer who once claimed his broom refused to fly until he apologized to it for neglect, adding an oddly relevant layer to what you're witnessing as the elves' magic seems to express opinions of its own. The scholarly debate phrase brushes your thoughts, whether magic shapes its users or users shape their magic. And here the evidence leans toward the second, because the elves' growing autonomy radiates outward into the enchanted objects around them, as if their spells, once tightly bound by centuries of routine, are stretching and flexing like muscles waking after a long, dreamless sleep. You watch as a small cluster of elves gathers around a rolling pin that keeps levitating a few inches off the counter, bobbing up and down like an eager apprentice trying to rise above its station. The elves exchange glances, fleeting, excited, and with a coordinated flick of fingers they stabilize the object in midair, not to suppress it but to guide it, weaving tiny gestures that coax the pin into controlled circles until it spins like a miniature orbiting planet. The kitchen lights dim momentarily as if acknowledging the shift, and you sense the elves' magic behaving less like a tool and more like a living current aligning itself with a new intention. The elves nod among themselves, not with fear or confusion but with recognition, as though they've been waiting for exactly this moment. A sudden clatter erupts behind you, a stack of plates shimmering with magic that jumps from one to another like static electricity, and before the plates can scatter across the floor, an elf darts beneath them and claps sharply, sending a ripple of energy through the stack that settles them into neat alignment. It would almost feel like routine tidying, except the elf's expression is one of awe, not habit. Something profound is happening here. The air tingles as a group of elves gathers near the hearth, whispering rapidly, while one elderly elf gestures toward the fire with deliberate, firm motions. Each flick of his long fingers summons a spark that floats upward like a luminous fish, and as more elves join him, those sparks expand into larger, swirling motes of light that orbit the room in graceful arcs. You realize they're testing their collective magic, pushing beyond the rigid boundaries of the enchantments they've been expected to perform, discovering variations and layers long suppressed by custom. A soft joke slips through your thoughts about how if students could conjure floating firefish, Hogwarts would rewrite its entire charms curriculum overnight, followed by another small joke, imagining a first year accidentally creating a flaming carp stampede. And then one more joke about how even magical fish probably have strong opinions about their preferred swimming direction. Yet beneath the humor lies a growing awareness that the elves' magic is evolving, expressing something that resembles personality, agency, and perhaps even identity beyond their roles. A group of elves moves to a table at the far side of the kitchen where a large copper pot sits trembling faintly, releasing occasional puffs of steam shaped like tiny, disgruntled faces. The pot's enchantment, once crisp and predictable, now feels elastic, stretching beyond its original purpose. With calm precision, the elves approach it, palms raised, and channel gentle waves of silvery light that ripple through the air before wrapping around the pot like soft ribbons. The trembling quiets, the steam puffs smooth out, and the pot settles as though soothed. But even after the elves step back, the pot continues to emit faint glimmers of rebellious color, a shimmering violet hue at its rim, evidence that their magic has begun to mutate, not randomly but toward something more expressive. You feel the hairs on your arms lift with the thrill of witnessing magic stepping beyond its constraints, and another historical parallel flickers through your mind. Ancient wizards once believed magical tools had personal awakenings during societal transitions, though most modern scholars dismiss those accounts as metaphor. As the elves regroup, the entire kitchen feels subtly animated, as though each object has drawn a quiet breath. The cloths hanging from hooks sway even without drafts, their folds rippling like water touched by wind. A parchment pinned to a shelf curls its edges inward before relaxing again, almost as if listening. Even the floor seems to hum with a low, resonant vibration, pulsing faintly beneath your feet. The elves stand in tight clusters, murmuring in the soft cadence of their own tongue, and though you can't understand their words, you sense the emotion, excitement tinged with fear, determination woven with awe, the feeling of standing on the threshold of something irreversible. One elf, smaller than the rest but bright-eyed with intensity, steps forward and raises his palm, releasing a thin thread of magic that arcs like a shooting star before fragmenting into dozens of tiny sparks that scatter across the room and gently settle on various enchanted objects. As each spark lands, the object glows briefly, as though marked with potential. The demonstrations grow bolder. An elf approaches a broom leaning in the corner, touches its handle, and the bristles flare outward like the tail of a startled phoenix before settling into a sleek, polished fan. Another elf sends a ripple of blue magic across a stack of towels, and suddenly each towel flutters upward, spinning in slow circles like soft fabric moths, before drifting back to the table in perfect alignment. A teacup scurries across the counter on tiny porcelain feet, chirping like a mechanical bird before an elf gently taps it back into stillness. Everywhere you look, enchantments misbehave with just enough personality to hint at something deeper. The elves' magic is no longer limited to function. It is beginning to communicate. The air grows warmer as an elf directs a ribbon of golden light into the hearth flame, causing the fire to brighten with a strange layered glow. Not orange, not red, but a gradient of shimmering gold that pulses in rhythm with the elves' gathered energy. The flame stretches upward, forming shapes you almost recognize. A symbol like the knot you saw on the ancient tablet, woven curves looping around one another before dissolving back into the fire. The connection is undeniable. The elves have awakened something old, something that lay dormant in their magic for centuries, waiting for a spark of defiance to reignite it. The kitchen's atmosphere thickens with this newfound power, and suddenly, an oven door swings open on its own, releasing a swirl of shimmering heat that patterns itself into intricate shapes, swirling loops, spirals, and sigils that pulse with faint blue outlines. The elves watch closely, ears perked, eyes gleaming with the wonder of rediscovered heritage. A rolling pin levitates into the air, performing a graceful spin before dipping toward an elf who reaches up to tap it gently, sending it back into peaceful stillness. The moment feels ceremonial, almost sacred. More elves join the gathering, arriving in small groups from corridors and hidden nooks, each stopping short as they sense the shift in the air, their expressions shifting from confusion to awe, then to whispered agreement as they join the circle forming in the heart of the kitchen. Tiny hands clasp, magic flows through the joined line of elves like gentle lightning, arching from one to another with soft pulses of blue, gold, and white. The enchantments around them pulse in synchronized response. Spoons vibrate lightly in their jars. The flames flicker in choreographed beats. The hanging bells chime in delicate, accidental harmony. The elves begin to hum, a low, resonant sound that vibrates through the floor and up your spine. Not a song, but a rediscovered memory voiced aloud. Their magic pulses outward in wave-like breaths, each one slightly stronger than the last. And with each pulse, the enchanted objects shift from misfiring rebellion to coordinated responsiveness, as though realigning themselves to the elves rather than to the castle's ambient spells. You witness, breathless, the moment their magic evolves not randomly, but intentionally, guided by unified desire and ancient instinct. The air brightens again, and from the far side of the kitchen, a cauldron lifts itself fully off the ground, slowly rotating in midair with a grace so surprising that even a few elves gasp. Its metal glows in hues of royal blue and warm rose gold, swirling in patterns reminiscent of the runes you saw carved beneath the great hall. The elves' hum sharpens momentarily, and threads of energy flow from their fingertips toward the floating cauldron, wrapping around it like luminous vines. The cauldron shakes, releases a sharp ringing tone like a struck bell, and then settles softly back onto the floor, completely still, but transformed. The glow fades slowly, leaving behind a faint sheen of magic clinging to its edges, as though acknowledging its loyalty not to the castle, but to the elves themselves. As the humming fades, the kitchen falls into a weighty stillness. The elves stand together, breathing softly, absorbing what they have just accomplished. Their magic is no longer the passive spellwork of servitude. It has become expressive, adaptive, aware, and you realize you have witnessed the birth of something unprecedented. The disobedient spark in their magic is no longer accidental. It is a choice, a declaration, a dawning ability to reshape the world around them according to their own will rather than inherited obligation. The glow gradually dims, and the kitchen exhales into quiet. But nothing is the same anymore. Hogwarts has begun to shift, not through storms or curses, but through the awakening heartbeat of its unseen caretakers. Their magic pulses gently through the walls, settling like a new rhythm in the castle's ancient veins. And you know with absolute certainty that this gentle spark of defiant enchantment is only the beginning. You remain near the hearth as the last threads of shimmering magic fade into the warm air, and the elves, still gathered in tight clusters, begin shifting with purposeful whispers. Glancing toward the linen shelves at the far end of the kitchen, the tall, looming structure stacked with towels, aprons, napkins, and folded banquet cloths, all arranged with the kind of obsessive precision that would make any professor of arithmancy quietly weep with pride. The shelf itself seems to pulse faintly, almost like it's breathing, and as the elves part to make room, you notice a small figure climbing to the highest ledge. She moves with the balanced grace of someone who has spent a lifetime navigating precarious surfaces, and as she reaches the top, she plants her feet firmly, spreads her arms wide, and lets out a soft but commanding chime, a sound so clear and resonant that the entire kitchen stills instantly. The elf is smaller than most of the others, with bright, sharp eyes, long fingers that twitch with restless magic, and an apron tied diagonally across her chest, like a sash of authority. She carries herself with the poised intensity of a leader who did not seek power but carries it because no one else stepped forward. A gentle joke passes through your mind, imagining her scolding wizards twice her height with the authority of a general and twice the efficiency, and another soft joke rises as you picture her leading a seminar titled Rebellion 101, Folding Napkins with Purpose, followed by a third joke when you briefly imagine her receiving a leadership award from a council of enchanted brooms. But beneath the humor lies something deeper. This elf radiates quiet confidence, the kind that sparks revolutions not through fire, but through steadfast conviction. The gathered elves lean forward eagerly as she raises her hands, and from her palms flows a thin ribbon of silver-blue magic that traces graceful arcs in the air, forming symbols you recognize faintly from the ancient stone tablet: unity, heritage, pact, remembrance. The elves murmur in awe as the symbols hover above them, like softly glowing constellations. A mainstream historical fact flickers into your thoughts about how early magical societies often used gesture-based spell languages to coordinate group enchantments, and the shapes in the air feel like a rediscovery of that practice. A quirky fringe tidbit then bubbles up about a 17th century wizard who attempted to invent a universal magical sign language but was thwarted by his own mustache repeatedly catching fire, making the elves' elegant gestures all the more impressive. The scholarly debate phrase buzzes gently through your thoughts. Whether magical beings create their own cultural systems independent of wizards' influence, or whether those systems evolve in parallel, and as you watch this leader command her people with symbols older than memory, it becomes clear that the elves have always possessed their own structure, their own rituals, their own intricate internal world beyond human comprehension. The leader gestures sharply, and the shelves around her tremble as threads of energy seep from the folded linens, weaving together into a shimmering tapestry of diagrams, battle formations drawn from broom patterns, defensive spells encoded in the fold lines of tablecloths, escape routes mapped through the labyrinthine service tunnels beneath classrooms. The elves gasp softly, pressing closer, their eyes shining with recognition. These aren't new inventions, they're old memories returning, rituals embedded in fabric by generations of elves who understood that their true power resided in unity and knowledge, not obedience. The leader, whose name you still do not know, runs her fingers through the glowing diagrams, reshaping them with an ease that suggests deep familiarity. She moves threads here, adjusts sigils there, reinforcing structures that look strategic and ceremonial all at once. The room's hum intensifies as she begins a silent address, her gestures painting words in light rather than sound. Her hands describe arcs that speak of a long-forgotten covenant. Her fingers tap out rhythms that echo the old pact beneath the great hall, and the elves respond with coordinated shifts, forming rows that look less like an army and more like a choir of magic. The air fills with warmth as threads of energy pulse from their joined hands, creating a soft chorus of shimmering notes. You feel the vibration in your chest, a resonance like standing near a massive bell just after it's rung. She steps to the edge of the shelf and raises a folded napkin as if it were a ceremonial banner, flicking it open with a flourish that sends ripples through the air. Ripples that take shape, forming ghostly images of the founders standing beside towering ancient elves, all of them equal in stance and strength. The illusion is faint, but unmistakable. She flicks her wrists again, and the illusion shifts, now showing the second binding. The moment the pact twisted into something lesser, the moment elves' power narrowed into service. The room dims as the illusion darkens. Then, with a sharp, defiant gesture, she snaps the napkin closed, and the image shatters into sparks. The elves erupt into a wave of whispers, fear, excitement, anticipation, until she silences them with a single raised finger. The room goes still, with slow, deliberate movement. She lifts her apron sash and ties it tighter across her chest, anchoring it like armor. Her posture shifts. She stands tall, shoulders back, chin lifted, a stance of declaration. She jumps down from the shelves with a quiet thud, and the elves collectively straighten their posture. You realize you are watching a coronation of sorts, though without pomp or crown, only the quiet acceptance of responsibility by someone who understands the weight of it. She moves through the kitchen with graceful authority, inspecting the enchanted objects that continue to buzz with rebellious energy. Her fingertips leave trails of luminous residue as she touches cauldrons and utensils, not to silence them, but to harmonize their new magic. A suspended spoon calms its erratic spinning. A stack of cutting boards settles into an orderly tower, and a broom that had been attempting to waltz with itself halts respectfully. The elves observe her with respect that borders on reverence. Another group of elves approach her carrying an old book, an enormous tome nearly as big as she is, its leather cover cracked and peppered with centuries of soot. Together, they push it toward her with ceremonial reverence. She places one hand on it, and the book springs open, its pages fluttering until they reach a chapter titled Magica Domum Custodia, Magic of the House Guardians. You can't read much from your distance, but the diagrams resemble what you saw on the stone tablet. Elves and wizards working side by side to maintain the castle's deepest wards. The leader taps her finger on the page, and the book's letters glow, rewriting themselves into a language only elves can understand. When the glow fades, she nods once, and the elves around her cheer in soft, respectful chimes. From a hidden nook near the back of the kitchen, another elf appears carrying a long, narrow box wrapped in cloth. The box seems heavy, and the elves' chatter quiets as it is brought forward. The leader unwraps it carefully, revealing an object that makes your breath halt. A slender wooden rod carved with symbols identical to those on the ancient pact tablet. It's not a wand, Not exactly. It looks like a ceremonial baton, a tool of authority used by elves in rituals long forgotten. When she lifts it, the magic in the room leans toward her, as if gravity itself has shifted. A delicate pattern of light blooms from the baton's tip, casting a lattice of woven symbols across the kitchen ceiling. The elves gather in rows as she begins to move the baton in wide arcs, conducting them like a conductor guiding an orchestra. The room fills with pulses of magic, synchronized breaths of energy that sweep across counters, shelves, and walls. The enchanted objects rise again, but this time in harmony. Cups float gently, forming soft spirals in the air. Towels unfold into banners hanging like star-draped curtains. Cauldrons hum low notes that resonate with the beating heart of the castle. The magic is no longer rebellious or misaligned. It is purposeful, directed, unified under her guidance. The leader pivots sharply, and the entire room responds. The elves shift into new formations, triads that practice spell casting in coordinated waves, pairs that rehearse defensive flicks with polished silverware, groups that perform sweeping gestures tracing the ancient knot symbol in the air. Each team works with soft determination, their efforts not frantic but rehearsed, as though rediscovering movements passed down through silent muscle memory. The baton weaves through the air, leaving trails of glowing script that the elves read and follow instinctively. The air grows richer with magic, thicker, more potent. You feel it rolling over your skin in warm waves, magic that doesn't belong to the castle or to the wizards, but to the elves alone. Magic shaped by choice, not duty. You realize the leader isn't simply commanding drills. She's awakening heritage, guiding her people back to what they once were. Protectors, stewards, guardians of ancient balance. Another soft joke drifts into your thoughts about Hogwarts' staircase throwing a tantrum once it realizes who really keeps it functioning, followed by a second joke as you imagine this elf giving motivational speeches to grumpy portraits, and a third joke when you picture her organizing the ghosts into filing cabinets. But humor aside, the truth stands quietly in the air. She is leading a movement with precision and clarity that feels less like rebellion and more like restoration. The exercises evolve again. Some elves kneel around a glowing sigil drawn on the floor with enchanted ashes, channeling energy into the lines. Others practice quick, darting maneuvers that make them blur into streaks of blue and gold. A group stands at the far end, conjuring barriers of shimmering linen, shielding themselves from harmless bursts of light fired from enchanted ladles. Their teamwork is flawless. You can sense their growing confidence, their rising pride. The leader walks among them, touching shoulders, offering silent guidance, adjusting wrist positions during spell casting, nodding approval as they refine their techniques. Her presence is both comforting and commanding, the kind of leadership that doesn't demand loyalty but inspires it naturally. She returns to the center of the room, raising the baton overhead. The elves gather instantly. The room glows, and with a sweeping downward gesture, she sends a ribbon of silver-blue energy cascading across the entire kitchen. When it touches each elf, their aprons flare with light, marking them with sigils of unity, purpose, and ancient rank. The symbols pulse softly, linking them all in a shared network of magic. The leader lowers the baton and bows her head. The elves follow. A quiet falls over the room, profound, reverent, steady. When she finally lifts her gaze, her eyes glow faintly with new power, and you know that something irreversible has begun. A leader has risen from the linen shelves, and under her guidance, the rebellion has gained its heart, its voice, and its future. You stand very still as the new leader lowers her ceremonial baton, its glow fading into soft threads of blue that drift away like drowsy fireflies. And almost immediately, the atmosphere in the kitchen shifts again. Not in the objects, not in the elves, but in the castle itself, as though Hogwarts has inhaled sharply and is now exhaling in long, uneasy breaths. A faint rustling echoes through the upper stone, a whisper that skitters between walls and climbs toward the ceiling, and then you hear it, the portraits. Their muttering begins as a faint tremor, a quivering brushstroke beneath layers of paint, then swells into a chorus of nervous chatter that sweeps across the kitchen walls like a breeze through tall grass. You glance upward. The portraits hanging near the service entrance shake as if someone has knocked on the frames from inside the canvas. A distant frame coughs. Another clears his throat like a professor prepping for a dramatic monologue he's been waiting centuries to deliver. A soft joke slips across your thoughts, imagining a portrait union demanding better lighting conditions, followed by another joke about a painted noble refusing to wake up until he receives his morning cup of imaginary tea. And a third joke rises as you picture a landscape portrait complaining about foot traffic ruining its view. Yet beneath the humor lies something unmistakable. The portraits are not just awake, they're alert, watchful, and unusually focused on the commotion in the kitchens. A mainstream historical fact drifts gently into your mind, reminding you that portrait enchantments have long been used as informal surveillance systems in old wizarding homes, with residents relying on the painted subjects to relay messages or observe intruders, and a quirky fringe tidbit surfaces from some half-forgotten book about a Renaissance artist who claimed his paintings developed opinions strong enough to sabotage his work. These fragments align eerily well with what you are witnessing. Hogwarts portraits are not passive observers. They are participants in their own world. And right now, they are very interested in the elves. The scholarly debate phrase echoes faintly in your thoughts, hinting at ongoing arguments about whether magical portraits possess true consciousness or simply echo the personalities of their subjects. As the painted figures lean forward in their frames, eyes gleaming with something between curiosity and recognition, the room fills with the sense that the portraits know more than anyone expects. Perhaps they always have. The leader elf steps into a patch of pale firelight, her face illuminated with quiet authority, and the nearest portrait, a regal witch draped in painted velvet, leans so far out of her frame you fear she might topple onto the counter. Another portrait joins in, then another, until nearly a dozen painted inhabitants peer downward with varying degrees of concern, curiosity, and conspiratorial excitement. The leader meets their gaze without hesitation. She taps her ceremonial baton once against the stone floor. The sound resonates with soft brilliance, sending a ripple of magic upward toward the portraits. A silent signal the paintings recognize instantly. They straighten, stiffen, rearrange their expressions. One portrait of an elderly wizard adjusts his painted spectacles with theatrical pride. Another smooths out her shimmering dress, and a third, a knight frozen in mid-gallop, halts his imaginary horse and leans forward to listen. Then, with a subtle nod, the leader gestures toward the wall. The elves part to make way for her as she walks forward, baton at her side but glowing faintly, not aggressively. She isn't demanding loyalty from the portraits, she is acknowledging an old alliance. The painted witch in the nearest canvas bows her head in a graceful arc, a gesture clearly studied with centuries of etiquette. Another portrait follows suit, then another, until the entire wall bends in unified respect. The moment feels ceremonial, ancient, rehearsed across generations of paint and magic. A portrait featuring a medieval kitchen scene suddenly flickers to life, its characters stepping aside to reveal a smaller painted door hidden within the brushstrokes. The elves gasp softly. The leader's eyes widen, flicker, and narrow in determination. She steps forward and touches the edge of the painted doorway. The surface ripples like water, shimmering as the magic responds. More portraits shift restlessly, revealing painted pathways, hidden alcoves, and small symbols that glow only when touched by an elf's presence. It is clear now that the portraits have been guarding secrets of their own. Secrets carved not into stone, but into pigment and canvas. The energy intensifies as a portrait of a long-forgotten Hogwarts steward clears his throat and mutters something that you only half hear, though the elves react with astonishment. He raises a painted quill and scribbles hastily in the margins of his own frame, symbols appearing in glowing ink, the sigils matching the luminous knots from the ancient tablet. The elves respond instantly, translating the symbols with visible excitement and marching into new formations. you feel the room shift again, not physically, but magically, like sliding into a deeper layer of Hogwarts understructure. More portraits awaken in waves, spreading down the corridor, crackling with latent magic. Figures stroll from one frame to another, relaying messages through painted landscapes. A knight gallops through 3 canvases to warn a portrait in a distant floral painting. A librarian in a dusty scene from centuries past pulls out a parchment scroll and begins scribbling furiously, animated, attentive, ready. The leader raises her baton again, and the portraits hush instantly. She gestures, small but deliberate, weaving shimmering signals, gratitude, alliance, secrecy. The portraits respond with nods, salutes, and flourishes of painted elegance. A wave of united magic flows through the frames as if they are joining the elves' cause. The room seems to glow brighter with every shared heartbeat between canvas and elf. The elves break formation and disperse into smaller groups. Some gather near the walls, studying the painted maps hidden within landscape frames. Others consult portraits who appear to have memorized secret routes through the castle's service passages. One portrait uncovers old notes etched in magical charcoal about past rebellions never mentioned in Hogwarts official records. The painted figures speak with familiarity, warmth, and faint mischief, revealing they have been waiting for this moment, waiting for the elves to reclaim their heritage. As the alliances deepen, one portrait in particular draws your attention. A painting of a grand hall lined with towering shelves of ancient tomes. The librarian inside it, an elderly witch with sharp features and a sharp temper to match, beckons an elf closer. She points toward a book in the background of her painting, a thin spine marked with a sigil you now recognize, the symbol of the First Pact. The elf nods in understanding, and the witch smiles, satisfied. Her painted hand reaches outward, passing through the canvas to present a glowing scrap of parchment. The elf receives it reverently, clutching it as though it were treasure. The parchment flares once, casting an arc of light across the kitchen, illuminating the structural magic woven into the very foundation of Hogwarts. The elves stare upward, watching as faint lines shimmer through the ceiling, tracing the network of wards the portraits have always been aware of. You realize with a jolt that the portraits have been guardians too, protectors of institutional memory rather than magical infrastructure. They have preserved stories the wizards forgot, upheld traditions the elves were separated from, remembered the truth behind the pact when the living world buried it beneath centuries of convenience. The elves regroup beneath the cascading lines of shimmering magic. Their leader steps forward, baton held high. She begins to trace new patterns into the air, patterns that bind their magic with the knowledge provided by the portraits. The room fills with threads of glowing lines, swirling together into a tapestry of power. Cauldrons hum, towels flutter like pennants in a gentle breeze, spoons vibrate in anticipation. The portraits nod approvingly, some smiling with pride, others wiping imaginary tears from painted cheeks. The magic begins to settle. The elves stand straighter. Their aprons glow with faint sigils of alliance. The portraits lift their chins, duty renewed. This is not a rebellion of chaos or defiance alone. It is the restoration of a sacred bond, a reunion between the silent stewards and the painted witnesses who have waited centuries to see this moment. A gentle warmth pulses through the room, radiating from the leaders, painted and living alike. And though Hogwarts itself creaks with ancient uncertainty, the walls seem to lean closer, listening to the low, harmonious hum rising from elves and paintings together. The night deepens, shadows lengthen, and the quiet power of their alliance blooms like a secret long overdue. The portraits blink first, but tonight they blink in allegiance. You linger at the threshold of the kitchen as the portraits fall into a hush, their painted expressions still lit with conspiratorial excitement, and the elves, now armed with ancient knowledge and renewed identity, shift into purposeful motion, their tiny feet padding across stone, with the quiet certainty of those who finally understand the weight and reach of their own magic. The leader lifts her baton once more, its glow muted but steady, and gestures toward the main corridor that winds upward toward the castle's heart. signaling that the moment has come for their newfound autonomy to leave the safety of the kitchens and seep into the wider world above. The elves respond immediately, dividing into small teams that scurry up the stairs like streams of moonlight, each group assigned a specific mission. Some slip into the laundry chutes, others vanish behind tapestries, and a handful dart through gaps between stones so narrow you'd swear they learned the trick from the castle's mice. A light joke flickers across your mind as you imagine the staircases filing formal complaints about increased magical foot traffic, followed by another soft joke about the ghosts trying to enforce corridor speed limits, and a third joke drifting in as you picture a Ravenclaw painting demanding permits for hallway enchantment. But beneath the humor lies the unmistakable sense of watching history shift quietly, the way leaves turn before anyone notices the season changing. A mainstream historical fact surfaces about how medieval households used hidden passages not only for servants, but for the strategic movement of people and messages, systems designed to blend seamlessly with daily life. The elves move through Hogwarts with that same efficiency, tapping into a network built not merely for labor, but for coordination. A quirky fringe tidbit then sneaks into your thoughts about a Tudor estate rumored to have its entire political system run by unseen kitchen staff who communicated through coded broom placements, an oddly fitting parallel to the elves' subtle maneuvers. And through it all, the scholarly debate phrase pulses softly. Whether the invisible laborers of magical society developed autonomous cultures beneath the scrutiny of their superiors, hidden in plain sight and layered beneath centuries of assumption. Up in the main corridors, you notice the first sign that the elves' subtle rebellion is leaking into Hogwarts' everyday rhythm. The chandeliers, normally content to hover obediently above each hallway. Tonight they sway with a peculiar rhythm, their candles bending sideways as though sniffing at unseen breezes. At first the movement seems accidental, then decorative, then undeniably synchronized. As an elf scurries beneath one chandelier, its candles brighten in a ripple of warm gold, illuminating the elf with what looks suspiciously like applause. Another chandelier farther down the hall emits a series of tiny pops, harmless sparks that drift toward a tapestry before dissolving like fireflies. You watch as more elves appear, darting across stone floors, each one subtly altering the atmosphere. The light grows richer, the air warmer, the magic alive in ways Hogwarts rarely reveals. A cluster of elves gathers near a portrait of a stern-looking headmaster who had, at some point, decided facial hair was a personality trait. He glances down at them with exaggerated suspicion, narrowing his painted eyes until only slits remain. One elf lifts a hand. She wiggles her fingers in a brief, elegant gesture that mirrors a sigil on the ancient tablet. The portrait's eyes widen. He huffs dramatically, straightens his robes, and then, with a kind of flustered loyalty, points urgently to a hidden latch tucked beneath the painting's frame. The elves nod, open the latch, and dart inside. The headmaster portrait straightens again, clears his throat with the satisfied dignity of someone who pretends not to enjoy helping rebels, and settles back into his frame. Farther up the stairs, the elves venture into the grand corridors where the echoes of magic linger like dust motes swirling in filtered moonlight. Some elves rearrange suits of armor, shifting helmets slightly askew or tilting shields to reflect small beams of light where none existed before. At first it seems like mischief, harmless, playful, but then you notice the pattern. The light redirected by the armor highlights specific runes etched into the stone, runes that most students never notice. The elves read these markings with the ease of reading a favorite storybook, tracing their fingers along slanted carvings that record ancient protocols of castle maintenance. They whisper to one another, replacing the armor pieces with deliberate precision, adjusting the angle of a visor here, the curve of a gauntlet there. Each adjustment sends waves of faint magic along the walls. The portraits along this hallway wake as well, some with yawns, others with irritated groans. One portrait of a medieval scribe swings his legs out of the canvas and begins taking notes with fervent enthusiasm, dipping his quill into invisible ink. A witch in a nearby painting rolls her eyes but smiles faintly as she watches the elves work, whispering something under her breath that sends a ripple of approval across her painted gown. Several portraits begin whispering to each other, debating the elves' strategy with the eagerness of gossiping nobles at a ball. Their voices drift down to you in snippets about time they've practiced for centuries. Make sure the brooms don't overexert themselves. Someone warn the staircase. And you realize that the portrait community is fully invested in this unfolding drama. As the elves press onward, Hogwarts itself seems to wake, not in alarm, but in awareness. The stone beneath your feet vibrates faintly. The torches on the walls flicker in curious acknowledgement. Even the air feels different, charged with a hum that suggests anticipation more than tension. The elves gather at strategic locations, beneath the marble staircase, inside the alcove where students hide during late-night snack runs, near the alcoves of suits of armor whose spears gleam with dormant enchantment. They begin testing their new magic subtly, casting small spells that shimmer delicately, enchantments so soft they barely disturb dust. A towel floats through a corridor like a ghostly scout. A spoon serves as a messenger, tapping out coded rhythms against a banister. A ribbon of energy flows beneath doors like a serpent made of moonlight. Higher still, near the Great Hall, the elves slip behind the enchanted ceiling, moving through maintenance spaces only they know exist. They whisper to the sky spell etched into the uppermost layers of magic, sending waves of energy spiraling into the illusion. The false sky flickers, not in malfunction but in quiet cooperation, revealing a faint shimmer of ancient runes beneath the clouds that only the elves can access. They breathe softly, and the sky responds with a glow that pulses like a heartbeat. At the base of the enchanted staircase, two elves step forward and raise their palms. They aren't trying to control the staircase. No one would dare, but they are testing its reaction. The steps tremble, groan theatrically, and then shift with a gentleness rarely seen. One flight extends like a cat stretching after a nap. Another retracts slightly, creating a small pathway behind the stone banister. The elves exchange glances, nod once, and slip into the hidden space. The staircase settles again, but not before giving what feels like an approving rumble. Farther along, a cluster of elves enter a corridor lined with statues. One statue, a knight, blinks in surprise as they approach. Shifting slightly from his usual heroic pose, the elves produce threads of shimmering magic and begin weaving them between the statues, creating a net of softly glowing lines. This is not sabotage, but reconnaissance, mapping the energy around the statues to test how they react to small enchantments. The statues remain still at first, but as the magic threads strengthen, one statue lifts its hand a few inches, another tilts its head, a third emits a soft metallic sigh. The elves stop, observe, adjust. They aren't pushing boundaries, they're coaxing the castle's sleeping magic back into conversation. The leader reappears from the shadows, her eyes glowing faintly with renewed confidence. She walks along the corridor, inspecting the elves' subtle enchantments. The portraits nod in approval as she passes. The suits of armor shift their stances to align with her path. A small breeze follows her footsteps, as though the very air honors her presence. She raises her baton and taps the stone wall lightly. A pulse of blue light spreads outward, passing through stone like ripples in water. It travels down halls and up staircases, through frames and across ceilings. The elves pause, listening as the ripple reflects back with information only they can read. The castle's readiness, its willingness, the paths where its magic is weakest or strongest. The elves scatter again, diving into side corridors with renewed determination. Some slip into the tapestry-laden hall where the dancing trolls continue their endless jig. The tapestry shakes with stifled laughter as elves tweak its border, reinforcing its magical threads. Others move into the owlery, where owls blink in sleepy confusion before realizing they are being groomed by enchantments so gentle they coo rather than hoot. A few elves venture into Filch's domain, quietly lifting dust off shelves and soothing irritated doorknobs. their movements so subtle even the caretaker wouldn't suspect anything beyond ordinary castle quirks. Throughout Hogwarts, small signs of elven influence accumulate. Chandeliers glow brighter, hallways warm slightly, portraits speak in whispers across canvases, coordinating silently with their living allies. The enchanted suits of armor stand taller, as if sensing something ancient returning to its rightful place. The castle doesn't resist. It adapts, responds, listens. It adjusts itself around the elves' subtle rebellion until the entire building feels like a giant creature turning over in its sleep, stretching its limbs as ancient energies circulate through its bones. At last, the elves gather in a long, moonlit hallway where large windows overlook the Black Lake. Moonlight spills into the corridor, pooling across the stone like liquid silver. The elves stand in formation, illuminated softly by the pale glow. Their aprons shimmer faintly with sigils awakened earlier. Their eyes reflect the moonlight like tiny beacons of purpose. The leader steps forward, baton raised. The portraits lining the corridor fall silent. The chandeliers dim. Even the lake outside seems to pause, its ripples slowing as though listening. She draws a circle in the air with the baton, and the circle glows, an ancient symbol of transition. The elves bow their heads as the glowing circle expands to encompass the entire hallway, its edges flickering like gentle flame. When she lowers the baton, the glow fades into the walls, into the floor, into the air, leaving behind a corridor subtly changed, stronger, brighter, more alive. The secrets have spilled into the corridors now, and Hogwarts has quietly, unmistakably shifted. You feel the moment the castle crosses its invisible threshold, from quiet awakening to full, coordinated upheaval, not with explosions or alarms, but with a slow, rolling wave of magic that ripples through every stone, every tapestry, every candle flame, as though Hogwarts itself has decided to lean in and listen to the movement unfolding in its very marrow. The elves gather in the moonlit corridor for only a heartbeat more before dispersing with purpose sharpened to a blade's edge, their small forms slipping through shadows and narrow gaps with the elegance of dancers tracing ancient choreography. The leader raises her baton one last time, signaling the start of the Great Apron Uprising, an event that does not burst forth violently, but instead unfolds as a symphony of precise, non-violent enchantments that alter the castle with the gentleness of snowfall and the inevitability of dawn. The first sign appears in the Great Hall, where the sky-charmed ceiling flickers softly and reveals, for a split second, old runes glowing behind cloud layers, a message visible only to elves and portraits, declaring the awakening of their pact. A soft joke drifts through your mind about the ceiling finally revealing its version of status updates, followed by another joke as you imagine students blaming weather patterns on misbehaving astronomy owls. And a third joke emerges when you picture a startled professor attempting to fix the illusion with a ladder and a strong lecture about meteorological discipline. Yet behind the humor lies something profound. The ceiling is responding to the elves, not malfunctioning, but cooperating. A mainstream historical fact glimmers in your thoughts about how medieval illusions were often tied to foundational enchantments, meaning any shift in the castle's deeper currents could be reflected in its sky spells, and a quirky fringe tidbit surfaces involving a rumored manor where house sprites once altered the dining hall's illusion to protest bad wages, resulting in a week-long thunderstorm indoors. The scholarly debate phrase hums gently. Some argue that magical architecture evolves, while others insist it responds to the will of its caretakers. And tonight, Hogwarts is very obviously responding. In the kitchens below, the elves mount their first coordinated action. Cauldrons hum in unison, glowing with blue and gold light. Towels float in formation overhead, twisting into ribbons that pulse with faint enchantments. The ceremonial baton glows brighter in the leader's hands. She gestures sharply, and the elves move like water flowing into new channels. Teams head toward the Great Hall, others toward the dormitories, some toward the library, and a few toward the towers, where winds whistle through hidden vents. Their movements are too planned, too synchronized to be improvisations. This rebellion has roots stretching centuries deep and branches just now breaking the surface. The Great Hall becomes their first stage. The elves slip through side alcoves unnoticed, their magic weaving gentle disturbances into the air. Candles flicker upward like startled birds. Tablecloths ripple as though breathing. Plates tremble faintly, clinking softly with the promise of mischief. Then, without fanfare, aprons begin appearing, not worn by elves, but floating high above the tables, fluttering like banners of a tiny but resolute nation. Dozens of aprons unfurl in perfect formation, lining up with such precision that even a drill sergeant would weep quietly. Their hems glow with sigils traced from the ancient pact beneath the Great Hall, and every painted portrait watching from the walls straightens with reverence. The leader steps into the center aisle, lifts her baton, and every apron bows. The ceiling responds instantly. Clouds swirl. A pale crescent moon etches itself into the illusion, glowing fiercely like a beacon. The symbol of unity shimmers faintly behind it, visible only in the liminal layers of magic elves hidden in the rafters, release threads of shimmering light that drift down like enchanted dust. When the threads touch the tables, the silverware lifts into the air and begins arranging itself in new patterns. Spirals, knots, symbols of ancient treaties return to the surface after centuries of silence. No chaos erupts, no alarms sound. The Great Hall simply breathes differently, richer and deeper, cradling the elves' magic like a long-lost melody returning to its original key. The suits of armor lining the adjacent corridors feel the shift and begin to move, not to attack, but to adjust their stances. In acknowledgement, helmets tilt, spears dip, shields rise slightly, creating a semi-ceremonial guard of honor for any elf who passes. It is subtle enough that a passing student might blame drafts or poltergeists, but to the elves, this is a salute. Meanwhile, in the library, a group of elves moves with reverent care. They glide between shelves like shadows, their fingers trailing sparks of soft blue along row after row of texts. Books hum faintly as enchantments woven into their bindings stir. A few tomes lift themselves and open mid-air, turning pages in slow, deliberate flips as if reacquainting themselves with forgotten knowledge. The library portraits nod in approval, especially the ones who've been bored for decades and welcome any excuse to look dramatic. Near the restricted section, an elf touches the lock. The metal shivers under her fingers and unlocks not with defiance, but with recognition. She bows slightly, and the gate opens like the mouth of a sleeping giant stirring awake. Inside, the books behave curiously. Some glow with protective spells, others whisper softly, and one particularly moody volume releases a puff of dust shaped like a sigh. The elves are not here to steal knowledge. They are rekindling the magic that once bound them to the castle's deepest wards. The leader enters and touches the air itself. The restricted section glows. Upstairs in the towers, the elves enact another subtle enchantment. They gather at windows overlooking the Black Lake, raising their hands in unison. Threads of white-blue light coil upward, weaving into the breeze. The wind shifts. Feathers drift in from the owlery, glowing slightly, carried by currents altered by elven intention. The owls hoot softly, lulled by the unusual calm. Even the moonlit lake below ripples in gentle spirals, mirroring the sigils the elves traced earlier beneath the enchanted ceiling. Yet the rebellion is not limited to beauty and ceremony. Practical enchantments bloom across the castle like seeds sprouting in fertile soil. A malfunctioning lantern sputters before steadying into unwavering brilliance. A staircase, known for rude behavior, flattens its incline temporarily for elderly portraits to stroll across more comfortably. A suit of armor notorious for startling first years gently hums a lullaby instead of rattling aggressively. Brooms, sensing new discipline, sweep errant dust into neat lines without needing to be asked. The elves' uprising is not a force of destruction. It is a restoration of balance, competence, and long overdue pride. Still, their symbolic gestures grow bolder. In the second-floor corridor, a tapestry depicting medieval duels begins to animate more dramatically as elves feed magic into its threads. The knights move faster, the duels fiercer, and at one point a knight pauses entirely to wave politely at passing elves, a clear sign of allegiance, much to the portrait community's delight. Downstairs, the suits of armor begin swaying in unison to a rhythm only they and the elves can hear. The resulting clinks echo through the halls in harmonious cadence, like soft metallic chanting. The elves reach the staff lounge next. This room, usually quiet and filled with slightly wilted armchairs, becomes vibrant with new magic. The elves trace symbols onto the walls and the ceiling, awakening protective charms long dormant. The portraits inside, snoring wizards and witches who often slept through their own classes while alive, snap awake and immediately begin offering advice, useless and contradictory, but enthusiastic nonetheless. The elves nod politely, ignoring 90% of the suggestions, but drawing on the remaining fragments that relate to old pacts, enchanted blueprints, and structural secrets. From there, the elves slip into the common rooms. They do not disturb students. Instead, they adjust the flames in the fireplaces to burn steadier, whisper runes into banisters to silence creaks, and patch threadbare rugs with tiny flicks of magic. In Gryffindor Tower, a tapestry depicting old heroes glows faintly as the elves restore faded parts of its pattern. In Ravenclaw's lofty room, the enchanted stars on the ceiling brighten. In Hufflepuff's cozy den, the plants perk up noticeably, leaves shimmering with health. And in Slytherin's underwater common room, the light filtering through the lake grows clearer, revealing schools of silverfish darting through green shadows in elegant spirals. Their work is so quiet, so soft, that it might seem invisible, yet the castle feels undeniably renewed, reinforced, recentered around the beings who have always tended it. But as the night deepens, symbolic gestures give way to the true heart of the uprising, the Great Hall ritual. The elves gather in silence, hundreds of them, forming concentric circles around the 4 house tables. Their leader stands at the center, baton-raised candles dim to a hushed glow. Portraits lean forward in anticipation. The sky illusion shifts subtly, clouds rolling aside to reveal a soft, swirling vortex of starlight. The leader taps the floor. A shockwave of light blooms outward, touching each table in succession. The wooden surfaces glow with runes once used by the founders themselves. Gryffindor's bold sigils, Hufflepuff's gentle knots, Ravenclaw's spiraling glyphs, Slytherin's sinuous marks. None of them dominate. All are equal. The elves bow their heads. Their collective magic pulses once, twice, 3 times. The runes respond, weaving together into a unified pattern that spreads across the entire hall. This is not rebellion. This is reclamation. This is the reawakening of a forgotten truth. The castle flourished only when elves and wizards upheld their roles as partners, not masters and servants. The last pulse of magic settles, lingering on the stone like a promise. The hall returns to stillness, but the air is changed. Fuller, warmer, alive. The Great Apron Uprising has unfolded with precision, dignity, and silent triumph. Hogwarts has been gently, irrevocably reshaped. You feel the castle's heartbeat slow into a deep, resonant cadence as the Great Apron Uprising settles across the halls like a blanket of warm, patient magic, not triumphant nor boastful, but steady, deliberate, humming with a certainty that spreads through every crack between stones. And high above the Great Hall, the enchanted ceiling twitches as though wiping its eyes before drifting into a serene swirl of starlight, its runic reflections lingering like quiet applause. The elves do not linger on their victory, not out of modesty, but because they have no interest in grand finales. Their work is continuous, flowing. Rebellion for them is not an eruption, but a rhythm. As the last waves of magic ripple outward, the elves begin to withdraw into the castle's deeper arteries, scattering like sparks from a soft blue flame. each carrying a piece of their regained heritage into the corridors where it will take root. A light joke whispers through your thoughts as you imagine the staircases trying to write a formal report about tonight's events and giving up halfway through to indulge in melodramatic groaning, and another joke floats in as you picture portraits debating whether they should start wearing small badges to show support, followed by a third joke involving a suit of armor attempting to choreograph its own celebratory march only to clatter into a wall. Yet beneath all this humor lies the gravity of what you've witnessed. The castle is quiet, but it is not unchanged. It is watching, listening, adjusting. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your memory about how ancient magical institutions often rested upon relationships far older than their public histories admitted, and a quirky fringe tidbit follows about a monastery rumored to be run entirely by its enchanted furniture for one blissful month, during which monks mysteriously recorded record productivity. The scholarly debate phrase hums gently in your chest, whether magic reflects the will of the powerful or the harmony of its caretakers. And tonight, the answer seems woven into every glowing rune. Magic bends toward balance, not hierarchy. The elves regroup slowly, not with exhaustion, but with contemplative calm. They gather in quiet corners, behind curtains beneath staircases, inside alcoves shaped like half-forgotten memories. Their leader moves among them in measured steps, her baton dim now, its glow retreating into the wood as though saving its strength for the next dawn. She lifts her free hand, palm outward, and the elves rise to attention without sound. The portraits, sensing the moment's significance, still their animated expressions. Even the torches stop flickering. The leader bows her head. Her people bow in return. It is not an ending gesture, but a promise. The uprising is not a climax, but a beginning. The elves move again, spreading through the castle to test the stability of the adjustments they've made. In the great hall, they inspect the glowing runes along the tables. The sigils pulse faintly, holding steady like newly restored nerves. In the kitchens, cauldrons simmer with gentle contentment, emitting warm puffs of magic that coat the walls like memories returning. Towels hang effortlessly in perfect balance. Even the rolling pin, which earlier had attempted to achieve orbit, settles upon the counter as though proud of its contribution. Upstairs, the castle reacts with cautious cooperation. The suits of armor hold their newly refined positions with almost regal poise. A tapestry of Vikings softly animates itself into a synchronized bow as the elves pass. Even Peeves, drifting midair with impish curiosity, pauses long enough to squint approvingly at a choreographed formation of floating spoons before deciding there's no fun in disturbing something so beautifully unsettling. The staircases adjust their angles without tantrum. Doors open gently instead of slamming. The fireplaces burn with steadier flame. Hogwarts is not behaving, it is harmonizing, aligning with the elves' quieter, deeper magic, like a great creature stretching into a posture it forgot it knew. The elves move toward the towers next. A group gathers within the astronomy tower's lower chamber, where drafts swirl like restless spirits. They lift their palms, channeling soft tendrils of light into the currents of air. The drafts settle instantly into even circular patterns. The wind outside the windows shifts in response, drawing shapes across the sky that mirror the ancient sigils they revitalized earlier. The moon seems to glow in approval, hovering like an ancient witness. In the owlery, elves perch along beams, gently brushing feathers and aligning perches. Owls blink slowly, their amber eyes softening as threads of quiet enchantment weave through the rafters. The owls coo in strange harmony, rustling their wings in unison. It feels like a blessing. Downstairs, another group enters a dusty corridor where forgotten relics hide beneath sheets. They lift the cloths with flicks of their fingers, dust scattering like golden pollen. Beneath the fabric lie old magical devices, broken ward stones, cracked enchanted bowls, tarnished medallions. The elves whisper spells that seep into the objects, restoring faint glows. These relics stir, remembering their purpose after centuries of neglect. They do not awaken fully, only enough to hum gently. The elves nod, satisfied. restoration, not revolution. They continue into the dungeons, where the chilling air makes their breath visible in tiny clouds. Slytherin's low-lit halls reflect their glowing sigils in shimmering waves. The elves approach the stone walls and press their palms flat. A soft rumble travels upward. The water outside the windows brightens unexpectedly, as if lake creatures have gathered near to observe, shimmering scales flickering with curiosity. The portraits in the upper floors begin spreading word of the elves' progress. Painted messengers bustle between frames, some dramatically fainting onto couches within their canvases, others writing quick notes into the corners of their scenes. A portrait of a 17th century herbalist announces proudly that the elves revitalized a hallway near her frame, prompting her painted plants to bloom in unexpected colors. An old wizard in a dusty portrait tries to look stern, but even he cannot hide the smirk curling beneath his beard as he watches the elves perfect their spell formations. The rebellion spreads into unexpected territories. Toward the hospital wing, elves slip beneath beds, rebalancing the magic that keeps linens warm and drafts at bay. A few hover beside medicine cabinets, ensuring ingredients align precisely, quietly preventing one particularly mischievous bottle from tipping itself off a shelf. Madame Pomfrey's magical quills perk up from their nap as though sensing the renewed harmony. In the lower alcoves near the Slytherin common room, water drips from the ceiling into a shallow pool. The elves approach the dripping rhythmically, weaving patterns of light across the droplets. They synchronize the drips into a gentle, calming cadence that echoes through the stone. The distant whisper of water becomes soothing, like a heartbeat. Elves exploring the upper corridors pass the room of requirement, where the door shivers subtly, a gesture of respect, perhaps, or curiosity. The elves place their hands upon the frame, channeling soft energy into its grain. The room pulses with reciprocated recognition. Though it remains closed, even spaces built from pure intent acknowledge those who share similar magic. As dawn approaches, the rebellion's final stage begins. Not destruction, not overthrow, but equilibrium. The elves gather again in the moonlit corridor overlooking the Black Lake. They stand in rows, their aprons glowing faintly with sigils of unity. Their leader steps to the front, baton held gently, its glow barely perceptible now, like the dying ember of a reborn flame. She looks out at the lake. The sky brightens with the first echo of sunrise. Her posture softens. She lowers the baton. What comes next is not spectacle, but quiet preparation for the next chapters. Sections 11 and 12. The conclusion of a story still unfolding. The elves bow as one, their magic settling into the stone like roots, weaving deeper into fertile ground. Portraits bow too. The castle hums faintly, carrying the resonance of their harmony. No final fanfare, no crack of thunder, only balance reclaimed, power reframed, history remembered. The night ends not with a flourish, but a soft exhale. Hogwarts sleeps again, but differently now, aware, realigned, listening. The rebellion continues into sections 11 and 12. You remain standing near the tall window overlooking the Black Lake as the soft shimmer of dawn creeps across the sky, casting faint ripples of peach and silver across the water's surface. And though the castle seems at rest, a charged stillness vibrates in its bones, an expectation, a breath held between heartbeats, as if Hogwarts itself is waiting to see what the elves will do now that the uprising has settled into the mortar of every hallway. The elves, their aprons still glowing with runes faint as morning frost, descend from their quiet gathering place and disperse into the waking castle with a unity that feels both gentle and unstoppable, each one slipping into a different corner of morning life. The kitchens, the corridors, the library, the towers. Their leader walks among them with deliberate calm, her ceremonial baton tucked behind her like a quill, ready to write new chapters into ancient stone. And even though her posture remains disciplined, her steps seem lighter today. She is no longer carrying a spark of rebellion. She is directing a current already flowing deeper and wider than the night before. A soft joke glides across your thoughts about how the staircases might attempt to pretend nothing happened, even though they've been humming like guilty violins all morning, followed by another quiet joke as you imagine the professors trying to diagnose the castle's sudden cooperation as unusually well-behaved magic. And a third joke lands gently when you picture a few bewildered suits of armor practicing courtesy bows to passing elves just to be safe. Yet, the humor barely masks the enormity of what's unfolding. The elves are not celebrating or resting. They are stabilizing their uprising into permanence, threading their reclaimed power into the daily rhythms of Hogwarts with such subtlety that the castle itself adjusts to them as naturally as stone accepts moss. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind about how revolutions in medieval magical communities often evolved from loud declarations to soft but persistent infrastructural changes, and a quirky fringe tidbit follows about a remote French chateau where enchanted aprons once restructured the entire household after a single night of magical reorganization, prompting scholars to reconsider the agency of invisible workers. The scholarly debate phrase hums like a soft echo in your chest. Some experts claim that suppressed magical beings eventually reshape their environment simply by reclaiming their inherent purpose, whether wizards acknowledge it or not. As the sun rises higher, Hogwarts stirs. Students shuffle out of dormitories, rubbing sleep from their eyes, unaware that beneath their feet, the stone is humming quietly with elven magic. A Hufflepuff yawns so loudly, the portrait behind him startles awake and mutters something about uprisings before breakfast. But otherwise, the castle behaves with startling normalcy. Breakfast begins in the Great Hall, where enchanted platters glisten under the softly glowing ceiling. Behind the scenes, elves glide in and out of the kitchens, moving in choreographed patterns far too precise to be simple meal preparation. They stir cauldrons with a flick of their fingers, levitate platters with effortless grace, and weave small enchantments that allow utensils to arrange themselves in symmetrical patterns perfect enough to make any mathematician curl their toes with satisfaction. Underneath all of this, however, lies the deeper work of the elves. They are testing the boundaries of their newfound authority. In the hallways, small knots of elves evaluate the magic flowing through the walls, tracing light across cracks and adjusting enchantments that have fallen out of alignment over decades. At the base of a staircase, a cluster of elves kneel in a circle, pressing their palms against the lowest step. A soft blue glow spreads upward like a slow-moving sunrise, stabilizing the stairs with renewed balance. Farther down the corridor, a trio inspects a portrait known for shouting unhelpful advice during exams. They speak to it in soft, melodic tones, and the portrait's expression relaxes, still grumpy, still miffed, but somehow calmer, like it has been reminded of a much older set of instructions. Meanwhile, the suits of armor are not idle. Last night they swayed in ceremonial patterns, but now they stand in rigid rows as the elves inspect their joints, tapping gently with tiny hammers of light that send sparks bouncing across the armor's surface. The armor stiffens at first, then relaxes with an almost palpable sigh. One helmet releases a cloud of dust shaped vaguely like relief. Down in the kitchens, the elves have begun working on something neither symbolic nor ceremonial, but structural. They circle a massive iron stove, the oldest in Hogwarts, and begin weaving intricate sigils around its frame. Sparks drip from their fingers like melting starlight, sinking into the metal until the stove emits a deep, throaty hum. This isn't a repair, it's an awakening. The stove flickers with new heat, igniting flame patterns across its surface that match those carved into the ancient tablet beneath the Great Hall. In the library, several elves gather beneath the floating mezzanine, where the oldest tomes rest behind enchanted barriers. They reach up with long fingers and tap the wards. The air ripples. The enchantments shift from stiff rigidity to fluid motion, accepting the elves' presence with surprising ease. Books rustle softly, pages fluttering like wings. A particularly ancient tome flips open and begins reciting a spell in a dusty monotone. The elves stop it with a gentle tap and rebind its enthusiasm with a woven ribbon of quieting magic. Even the restricted section grumbles in approval. At the far edge of the library, a group of portraits gather in a semicircle, debating in hushed tones the implications of the elves' work. A painted historian, his spectacles perched precariously on the edge of his nose, scribbles notes with growing excitement. A witch in an ornate blue hat fans herself dramatically and announces that she hasn't seen an uprising with this level of finesse since the Curtains' Revolt of 1432. A smug knight responds by suggesting that the elves should consider taking formal command of castle repairs from the professors. His horse whinnies appreciatively. The elves ignore them, focused entirely on their tasks. But the elves' influence extends beyond the castle's magical infrastructure. They move into places rarely visited even by professors. Old utility tunnels beneath the dungeons, forgotten storerooms where stale enchantments languish, narrow vents where the castle sighs in drafts older than the portraits. They press their palms to ancient stones etched with symbols that once channeled the castle's lifeblood. Many of these symbols have faded into near invisibility, eroded by centuries of missed upkeep. The elves restore them with luminous strokes of magic, tracing the cracks until they glow like fresh ink. Elsewhere, in hallways where students whisper secrets or race to avoid tardiness, elves reinforce the protective charms embedded in the archways. They thread golden strings of magic through the stone, adjusting angles, strengthening corners, calming restless enchantments that flicker too eagerly at the edges. A suit of armor slowly lifts its spear in salute. A tapestry portraying a young wizard practicing levitation flickers as the boy inside manages, for the first time in decades, to lift the feather successfully. As they work, the elves begin to influence the atmosphere in more subtle ways. The lighting grows softer, less harsh. The air warms with a gentle glow, carrying the faint fragrance of herbs used in ancient cleansing rituals. Even the dust motes drifting through sunbeams seem to move with more grace, as though obeying choreography written into the air. By midday, Hogwarts feels transformed, not visibly, not dramatically, but in its rhythm. Spaces breathe easier, magic flows more smoothly. Small mishaps that once plagued the castle cease entirely. No more slamming doors, no more sputtering torches, no more trick staircases trapping students mid-step. Everything moves with quiet precision, as though the castle has settled into a long-forgotten alignment. In the afternoon, the leader gathers her elves once more, not in secret corners or moonlit halls, but in the open air of a quiet courtyard. Sunlight filters through shifting leaves, shimmering across their aprons. She taps her baton softly against the stone, and the courtyard fills with a gentle hum. The elves sit in orderly rows, listening as she outlines the next steps. Not with spoken words, but with gestures of light that ripple through the courtyard like waves on a still pond. She shows them images of the ancient pact, the runes of unity, the tree of balance, the knot of shared magic. And then she shows them something new, an open path, branching toward sections 12 and beyond, an invitation to shape the future not just of Hogwarts, but of their identity. The elves bow, not in obedience, but in acceptance. As the courtyard glows faintly with their combined magic, the portraits lining the arches blink with astonishment. A painted scholar whispers, "They are writing themselves into the castle's story." He is right. And as the sun sinks toward the horizon, the elves rise again, ready for the last chapter of this tale, a chapter that will be shaped gently, silently, powerfully, as dawn yields to dusk and the castle prepares for Section 12, the final turning of this quiet, unstoppable tide. You feel the castle relax into twilight as the sun drifts below the horizon, leaving behind strokes of violet and gold that soften the rough edges of the stone and cast long, gentle shadows across the courtyard where the elves last gathered. The fading light settles into a calm that feels earned, as though Hogwarts itself exhales after witnessing the uprising take its final, deliberate shape. The elves disperse from the courtyard in small clusters of glowing aprons and quiet footsteps, fanning out across the castle with the ease of water filling hollow spaces, flowing back into the work that defines them, not servitude, but stewardship. Their leader walks last, baton tucked beneath her arm, her silhouette framed by the deepening colors of the evening sky. Even without a word or gesture, all who see her understand that the rebellion has reached its final phase, not of resistance or upheaval, but integration, weaving every new thread of reclaimed power seamlessly into the fabric of Hogwarts' living magic. A light joke brushes your thoughts as you imagine the old portraits preparing congratulatory speeches, only to forget half their lines, followed by another as you picture the staircases insisting they never misbehaved in the first place. And a third joke glimmers as you envision a suit of armor earnestly requesting performance reviews for its newfound posture discipline. Yet underneath the humor lies a soft truth. This is no longer rebellion. It is restoration, alignment, quiet triumph. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind about how ancient magical communities often relied on symbiotic relationships between beings and structures, each maintaining the other in subtle, collaborative rhythms. Then a quirky fringe tidbit follows about a remote medieval abbey rumored to have been stabilized entirely by its invisible guardians, creatures no monk ever admitted existed, whose vespers hummed through the stone like lullabies. The scholarly debate phrase hums softly. Some claim that magical autonomy emerges only when structures become imbalanced. Others believe it blooms naturally as soon as forgotten voices begin speaking again. Tonight, Hogwarts leans gently toward the second truth. The castle begins its nighttime winding down, but something in the rhythm feels different, more measured, more harmonious. Torches along the hallways flicker in a pulse that syncs with the elves' steps. The enchanted ceiling in the great hall dims into a deep indigo sky scattered with constellations you've never seen before, their shapes mirroring the ancient sigils restored during the uprising. Students returning from dinner spot the new stars but shrug, assuming the sky is experimenting again. Only the portraits understand, and they watch with reverent, painted smiles. Below, in the kitchens, elves clean with the ease of long habit but with new purpose. Cauldrons hum softly, content. Plates align themselves in tidy stacks with minimal prompting. Towels fold midair into perfect squares. But tonight, this routine feels like ceremony. Every movement connects back to the pact they have reawakened. Every flick of magic resonates with the castle's wards above them. The leader makes her way through the kitchens, touching the largest pots, the oldest pans, the cracked stone counters. Each touch reaffirms the ancient bond. She moves like a conductor, guiding the last notes of a symphony toward resolution. Upstairs, the elves tend to Hogwarts' quiet nighttime rituals. In the hospital wing, they adjust blankets, while Madame Pomfrey snores with dignified volume behind her office door. Enchanted jars of salve glow with renewed warmth beneath their touch. A floating lantern drifts closer to an ill child and steadies its light at a softer hue. The elves move silently, reverently, and the room calms around them. In the library, the uppermost stacks sigh contentedly as the elves inspect the ancient wards once more. One elf presses her palm to a book that has refused to open for 3 centuries. The book stirs, shivers, and then spreads its pages like wings. The elf bows, restores its ribbon bookmark, and returns it gently to rest. Another group reinforces the charms protecting the mezzanine floor, weaving tiny threads of magic through the wooden beams until they gleam. Books rustle with satisfaction. A few elves slip toward the clock tower where gears grind restlessly. They lift their hands and the gears slow, then settle into smoother cycles. The pendulum steadies. Time itself seems to inhale, exhale, and settle into a deeper, slower rhythm, one aligned with the elves' reclaimed magic. Meanwhile, the portraits launch into their nocturnal gossip, but tonight their murmurs sound almost reverent. In a frame depicting a smoky tavern, a group of painted wizards raise imaginary mugs to toast the elves. A noblewoman outside the charms classroom smiles as a line of elves march past, their aprons shimmering softly. A warlock in the divination corridor nods as if he'd predicted this centuries ago, but was waiting for someone to ask. Down in the dungeons, the elves reorganize subtle enchantments that control water flow between the Black Lake and Slytherin's common room. They recalibrate green-tinted lanterns so the light glows with a steadier luminescence. They soothe restless enchantments in door hinges, silencing creaks that once echoed ominously. The walls hum in gratitude. In the owlery, night air pours through broken windows. The elves whisper gentle magic into the rafters. Feathers brighten, sleepy owls coo as they watch the elves glide between perches, reinforcing wooden beams and securing loose stones. One particularly fluffy owl leans forward and nudges an elf with its beak. The elf pats its head. Magic shivers softly between them. The elves move next to the towers. Ravenclaw's crisp heights, Gryffindor's winding staircases, Hufflepuff's warm basement halls, Slytherin's watery depths. They adjust enchantments that regulate room temperatures. They nudge portrait frames back into alignment. They polish handrails invisible to human eyes but essential for keeping wood free from spell corrosion. The house ghosts watch curiously. Nearly headless Nick bows in approval. The fat friar floats by humming cheerfully. The bloody baron watches silently but does not protest. Everywhere the elves go, the castle softens, calms, breathes, not in fear but in relief. As midnight approaches, the elves gather one final time, not in the dining hall or the courtyard or any grand location, but in a small, forgotten antechamber beneath the great hall. Runes glow faintly on the floor. The ancient tablet rests nearby, its carvings clearer now under the renewed magic. The leader steps forward. She raises her baton. The elves bow their heads. Soft blue light fills the chamber, gentle, steady, ancient. It is not a spell of rebellion. It is a spell of belonging. The runes on the floor warm like embers in a long-dead hearth. Lines of energy crawl across the stone, reaching toward each elf like threads, seeking the ends of a tapestry. When the leader lowers her baton, the energy sinks into the earth, fusing the elves' restored magic with Hogwarts' old foundations. The pact breathes again. The chamber dims. The elves rise, not taller, not transformed, but certain of who they were, who they are, and who they will be. Their leader extinguishes the baton's last glow with a gentle tap. The magic fades into stillness, and with the castle's heartbeat slow and calm, its wards balanced, its memories realigned, the elves slip quietly back into the halls. No dramatics, no fanfare, only the soft sound of tiny feet and the warm hum of lives lived in harmony with their home. Hogwarts sleeps, and this time it sleeps peacefully, because the elves are awake, and their gentle, steadfast power now flows through every stone, every spell, every breath of magic within these ancient walls. And so the castle settles into its deepest quiet, the kind that wraps itself around every hallway like a warm blanket, softening the edges of stone and magic alike. You stand for a moment at the edge of the corridor, listening to the peaceful hum that now flows through Hogwarts, steady, balanced, alive. The elves have returned to their quiet corners, not hiding, not diminished, but simply becoming the heartbeat beneath the castle's dreams. Their work lingers everywhere, in the warm glow of the torches, in the calm of the staircases, in the gentle pulse of enchanted ceilings that now drift with constellations older than stories. You breathe in the stillness, and the air feels different, lighter somehow, as though the castle is finally resting after a long, unspoken burden. The night folds itself around you with the softness of a closing book, each page turned by unseen hands that guide the castle into slumber. You step back, letting the calm settle into your own bones, knowing the elves will watch over every room until dawn. They always have. They always will.